Keith Urban had spent decades standing beneath the brightest lights Nashville could offer. 4 Grammys, stadiums roaring his name, a reputation carved into country music like stone. He was the man who never flinched, never faltered, never let the world see so much as a crack. But on the night of the 2025 CMA Awards, the legend everyone believed they knew slipped out of reach. Because Lainey Wilson saw something no one else was meant to witness. Backstage, only minutes before he was supposed to walk into millions of living rooms, Keith Urban was not preparing, smiling, or tuning his guitar. He was sitting alone in the dressing room, shoulders shaking, hands trembling so badly he couldn't hold a pick. Tears slid down his face, as if gravity itself was pulling him apart. He looked lost, disoriented, searching the room like a man who had suddenly forgotten the world he belonged to. Lainey froze. Nashville had polished Keith into an icon, a flawless performer, a symbol of stability. But the man sitting in front of her was none of those things. That night, the mask finally cracked. And in the silence of that small dressing room, a question hung heavy in the air, one Lainey could feel even before he spoke it. How does a man who conquered every stage forget where he is, who he is, or what he is supposed to do? How does a legend fall apart moments before the world expects him to shine? Long before Keith Urban became the man the world expected to stand tall on every stage, he was a boy growing up on the far edges of New Zealand, in a small house that seemed to creak under the weight of weather and worry. Money was always scarce, shifting like sand beneath the family's feet. His parents worked constantly, leaving early, returning late, stretching themselves thin so the boys could have something close to a normal childhood. Stability was a luxury, and the house held more silence than comfort. It was the kind of silence that pressed on a child's chest, shaping him long before he understood its weight. Keith learned early what it meant to feel small. At school, he was the boy with the funny accent, the skinny frame, the soft voice that cracked when he tried to speak up. Other kids tugged at his clothes, mocked the way he talked, sneered at the dreams he whispered. Every laugh at his expense sank deeper into him than anyone realized. In those years, he built a private world of doubt, the kind no adult could see. He carried the quiet fear that he wasn't enough, that he would never be enough. That belonging was something others received by birth while he had to fight for it with every breath. But in the middle of all that insecurity, something miraculous grew. His father brought home an old guitar, the wood worn smooth from someone else's story. Keith held it like it was fragile and sacred at the same time. He didn't know chords, didn't know structure, didn't know anything except that the moment his fingers touched the strings, the world softened. The sound wasn't polished or clean, but it felt like a heartbeat. In a life filled with noise that hurt, this was the first noise that healed. Music became the doorway out of the life that felt too tight for him. When the bullies circled, when the teachers overlooked him, when the walls felt too thin to breathe, he returned to the guitar. Every note was a thread pulling him toward a future he couldn't name yet but needed desperately. His mother noticed how he disappeared into that sound, how it steadied him. His father noticed too. And even when money was thin, they found ways to support the strange, luminous fire in their son. At one point, they pawned household items just to pay for his lessons. They did not speak of the sacrifice, and Keith did not dare ask. But he understood the truth of it. Love is not always loud. Sometimes it is a couple selling what they own so their son can chase the only thing that makes him feel whole. Still, even with music becoming his refuge, the shadows of his childhood followed him. He grew up with a fear that lived beneath the skin, the fear of failing the people who believed in him, The fear of being abandoned by those he loved? The fear that success, if it ever came at all, could evaporate as quickly as it appeared. The world outside the guitar still felt unpredictable. He sensed early on that safety was not promised. That belonging came with conditions. That dreams had teeth. Those wounds did not heal as he aged. They matured with him. Every applause in later years carried an echo of doubt. The quiet voice whispering he hadn't earned it. Every silence felt like danger. The critics, the audiences, the industry he later conquered, all awakened the ghosts of school hallways and childhood teasing. Even when he stepped into the spotlight, shining, confident, beloved, a part of him still saw the skinny boy in New Zealand trying to convince the world he deserved to stand there. No one understood that music was not just a career choice. It was survival. It was the only constant when everything else could slip away. And once you've survived by clinging to something, you never truly stop clinging. Years later, fans would marvel at Keith's poise, his grace under pressure, his flawless performances, but they could not see the roots beneath the surface, the early fractures that shaped the man. Because what the world celebrates as brilliance often grows from soil heavy with pain. When Lainey Wilson saw him in that dressing room before the CMA performance, shaken and lost, she did not just witness a moment of collapse. She witnessed the child inside him resurfacing, the boy who never felt safe, the boy who never felt enough, the boy who learned to keep standing even when his knees trembled. A man who grows up fighting for belonging never fully learns how to stand without trembling. And Keith Urban had been trembling far longer than anyone knew. Keith Urban arrived in America the way so many dreamers do, carrying nothing but a guitar, a fragile hope, and the stubborn belief that music might save him twice. The first time had been in childhood. The second time would happen here, in a country that did not know his name, did not know his past, and certainly did not owe him a future. He stepped off the plane with pockets nearly empty, but heart impossibly full. And for a while, that was enough to keep him going. But dreams don't pay rent, and Nashville is a city that tests believers before it rewards them. Keith found himself sleeping in his car on narrow back streets, waking to cold mornings and fogged windows. Some nights he managed to rent a couch from strangers. Other nights, he tucked himself behind the steering wheel, tracing song lyrics on a notebook lit only by passing headlights. He played wherever he could, in half-empty bars where the air smelled of beer and loneliness. The applause was thin, the pay even thinner, but the music kept him alive. It was the only part of his life that didn't feel fragile. Yet, even as music carried him, something darker followed him across the ocean. The insecurity he had buried as a child crept back into his bones. The pressure to prove himself, to belong, to survive in a land where thousands tried and failed, gnawed at him. He turned to alcohol, then to harder edges. The substances dulled the voice that told him he wasn't enough, but they also dulled everything else. His life became a pattern of late nights and blurred days, chasing a dream while running from a shadow. Those years were not glamorous. They were a fight, a private war that no audience could see. He was losing money, losing clarity, losing himself. And yet, even in the haze, one thing remained sharp: the music. He wrote with hunger. He played with a desperation that made people stop drinking long enough to listen. There was something in his voice, something in the way his hands gripped the guitar, that sounded like survival. Then, slowly, the world began to notice. His breakthrough came with the album Golden Road, a body of work that did not just showcase his talent but revealed his soul. Critics called it electric, Sincere, fearless. Listeners felt as though they were hearing a man step into the light for the first time, shaking off years of struggle. Songs climbed the charts. Radio stations played his voice on repeat, and Nashville began whispering his name with something close to awe. The kid from New Zealand had broken through the noise and carved out a space that finally felt like it belonged to him. Success changed everything. Suddenly, he wasn't playing for 10 people in the corner of a bar. He was headlining festivals, hearing crowds roar his lyrics back to him. He walked into rooms where people didn't look past him anymore. They leaned in. He earned awards, respect, and stability. The world began shaping a new image of him. Polished, steady, powerful. But what truly altered the course of his life was not a song, not an album, not even a chart-topping hit. It was a woman. He met Nicole Kidman at a moment when the ground beneath him was finally starting to solidify. Their connection was immediate, intense, almost mythic. She saw past the fame that was beginning to form around him. She saw the gentle boy beneath the man, the quiet hunger, the fragility he tried so hard to hide. And for the first time in his life, Keith felt something larger than career, larger than applause, larger than the dream he had chased across oceans. He felt understood. Nicole didn't save him, but she steadied him. She gave him a kind of safety he had never known. With her, the chaos in his chest softened. The old wounds quieted. The man who once slept in his car now woke to a life he had never dared imagine. A family, a home, a future he no longer feared would collapse. His music deepened. His performances sharpened. He rose higher, steadier, brighter. He became a global icon not simply because of his talent, but because the world could feel the transformation in him. He was no longer the boy trying to belong. He was a man who had found his place. A man standing tall on stages that once seemed unreachable. A man who had outrun his shadows long enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had left them behind. But shadows do not disappear. They wait. And the higher Keith climbed, the more fragile the balance became. Because every triumph carried an echo of the boy who once doubted he deserved any of it. Every spotlight cast a second shadow behind him, long and quiet, reminding him that a life built on survival can be shaken by a single fracture. He rose from nothing to everything, from a car seat to a world stage, from loneliness to love, from a trembling boy to a legend. And that is why, when he finally fell, the fall felt endless. By the time Keith Urban reached the center of Nashville's spotlight, he was no longer the boy who fought for belonging. He had become the man millions adored, a refined presence in country music whose elegance set him apart from the genre's rougher edges. They called him the Gentleman of Country Music, a title he wore naturally. He was gracious without trying, polished without pretense, and talented in ways that seemed almost unfair. He could play guitar with a fire that startled even seasoned musicians, glide effortlessly across genres, and sing with a warmth that felt like a confession whispered in confidence. Everywhere he went, people felt drawn to him. There was something magnetic about his steadiness, something reassuring in the way he carried himself. He had survived the climb. He had earned the throne. And now, the world watched him rule it with grace. His success became a kind of mythology. More than 20 #1 hits on the Billboard country charts. 4 Grammys that shone like milestones on a road only he had been meant to walk. Sold-out world tours where crowds across continents lifted their voices to meet his. Television audiences saw him judge on American Idol, offering gentle honesty, kindness, and humor, in a world that often rewarded cruelty. Fans said he wasn't just a star. He was a light, a presence that softened the sharp edges of fame. And then there was Nicole. If Keith had risen quickly, their union launched him into another universe entirely. Together, they were the meeting point of Hollywood and Nashville, an orbit where glamour and authenticity touched. They appeared at premieres and galas with a grace that left cameras scrambling to capture every angle. To the public, they seemed untouchable, a pairing of power and tenderness that felt scripted by fate. She was the Oscar-winning actress with global recognition. He was the country icon who had pulled himself out of the shadows. Together, they became a symbol of balance, a marriage of two worlds rarely brought together so seamlessly. People talked about their devotion, their quiet affection, the way Nicole reached for his hand without looking, the way Keith looked at her as though she anchored him to the ground. They were photographed on red carpets, at award shows, outside small cafes, always with a kind of stillness around them, as if love had carved out a peaceful corner of the world just for the two of them. Fans admired them. Critics respected them. Nashville held its breath for them. Yet it is often in the brightest light that the darkest shadows gather. As Keith's fame grew, so did the pressure that accompanied it. He became not just a performer, but an expectation, a standard, a symbol of what country music could be when shaped by finesse and innovation. The demands intensified, tours doubled, interviews accumulated. Every album had to be better than the last. Every performance had to prove he still deserved the pedestal the world had placed beneath his feet. People saw the accomplishments, the applause, the awards. They did not see the exhaustion behind the charm, the weight of being held up as a model of perfection. Stardom had reshaped him, polishing the boy into a legend. But legends are rarely allowed to rest. He smiled for cameras, played for thousands, thanked audiences with gratitude that was sincere but increasingly strained. Fame became both armor and cage, protecting him from obscurity while trapping him in expectation. On stage, he was unstoppable, the master of a world he built with his own hands. Off stage, the stakes were different. The more he succeeded, the higher he had to climb just to stay in place. Every triumph set a new bar he was expected to meet. Every accolade whispered a question he could never fully silence. What if this is the best it will ever be? And beneath that whisper lay another, quieter, more dangerous one. What if they find out I'm still that boy who never felt enough? Even in moments of celebration, Keith sometimes felt a faint crack beneath the applause, as if all this brilliance rested on glass. Nicole was often the one who steadied him, grounding him when the world became too loud. With her, the chaos quieted. With her, he could breathe. But the demands of fame stretched them both. Their schedules grew heavier. Their lives, though woven together, were increasingly defined by distance. Love remained, but its shelter could not always hold back the storm. And so, as Keith stood at the top of the mountain he had once only dreamed of climbing, he discovered a truth that many learned too late. Success does not silence old wounds. Fame does not heal the fears carved in childhood. Spotlight does not offer peace. It only makes every crack more visible. From the outside, Keith Urban seemed invincible, a global icon, a man living the dream others would trade their lives to experience. But from the inside, the light that illuminated him also cast a shadow that followed his every step. The higher he rose, the more delicate the balance became, the more fragile the ground beneath him felt. He had everything: respect, wealth, recognition, love. And yet, in the quiet moments between songs and spotlights, a question haunted him. If the world only loves the strongest version of you, what happens when you can no longer hold that version together? The answer would come years later, backstage at the CMA Awards, when the man at the peak of fame finally let the world slip from his hands. Fame can lift a man so high that the world forgets he is still made of flesh. But even at his brightest, Keith Urban never outran the shadows he carried from childhood. They slept beneath the surface of every triumph, waiting for the moment when the applause would finally quiet enough for him to hear them again. That moment came slowly at first, then all at once, like a dam cracking under too much weight. The world knew Keith as the polished star, the man who stood steady beneath blinding lights. They did not know how often he lay awake at night, breathing through panic that pressed against his ribs. They did not see the tremors of anxiety creeping back into his hands, the tightness in his chest before stepping on stage, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Burnout wasn't just a whisper in his life. It was a constant vibration, humming beneath his performances, rattling through the days he tried to hold together. Old battles resurface too. Addiction is not an enemy that disappears when a man becomes successful. It lingers, silent, patient. Keith had fought it once and won. But fame has a way of reanimating every ghost. The pressure to stay perfect, to stay relevant, to stay adored, cracked his resolve piece by piece. He began slipping again, not into chaos, but into the quiet, private unraveling that only those closest to him could sense. Nicole sensed it first. Their marriage had once been the anchor in his storm, a place where he could untie the knots fame tightened around him. But as the years grew heavier and his internal struggles sharpened, the space between them widened. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, drifting, two people pulling away from each other without meaning to, lost in their separate worlds, their separate wounds. When the end finally came, it didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a surrender. And when Nicole walked away, something inside Keith fractured so deeply he didn't know how to name the pain. One friend said quietly that she hadn't just left the marriage. She took the last piece of his confidence with her. The world had always been a loud, demanding place, but after the divorce, it became unbearable. The man who once stood tall on global stages now struggled to stand in the quiet of his own home. He continued performing, because that is what legends do. They keep the machine running even when their hearts have stopped moving. But the tours changed. The venues changed. The rooms grew smaller. The crowds more intimate. The stages less grand. He began accepting private gigs, corporate events, casino shows, anything that would fill the silence he could no longer tolerate. It wasn't about money. It was about distraction. As long as he was working, he didn't have to confront the hollow ache eating away at him. But every stage reminded him of who he used to be. Every guitar string hummed with memories of a life that no longer felt like his. And with each passing month, the pressure of the industry became a weight he could barely carry. Nashville expected perfection. The world expected resilience. No one wanted to believe that the man who had once dazzled audiences could be falling apart behind closed doors. So he hid it. He smiled on stage, laughed in interviews, posed for cameras. He said he was fine, even when he wasn't. He performed with the precision of a man who has practiced survival for far too long. But the facade cost him pieces of himself. The more he pretended, the lonelier he became. Nights ended in silence that cut deeper than any criticism. Days passed with a heaviness he couldn't shake. The phone calls dwindled. The rooms felt colder, even surrounded by people. he felt unbearably alone, as if he were standing behind glass while the world moved on without noticing. The tragedy wasn't in a single moment. It was in the accumulation of 1,000 quiet collapses. The anxiety, the exhaustion, the addiction scraping at the edges of his resolve, the marriage slipping through his fingers, the industry demanding brilliance from a man who could barely breathe, the loneliness swelling until it became another room he could not escape. And still, he pushed forward, fueled by the instinct that had carried him since childhood. Don't stop. Don't slip. Don't let the mask fall. But masks grow heavier each year. And Keith had been carrying his for decades. By the time he stood backstage at the CMA Awards, trembling in the dim light of a dressing room, the tragedy had already unfolded long before Lainey Wilson opened the door. She didn't witness the beginning of the fall. She witnessed its culmination, the moment when all the fractures finally met in the middle and split him open. He was no longer the icon, the gentleman, the legend. He was just a man who had run out of places to hide his sorrow, a man built from wounds that fame had never healed, a man standing alone in a storm he had tried so hard to outrun. He was no longer Keith Urban, the world's superstar. He was simply a man trying not to drown. The truth of what happened on the night of the CMA Awards did not begin in that dressing room. It began in the unseen spaces of Keith Urban's life, in the quiet unraveling that unfolded long before the public ever suspected anything was wrong. But it was Lainey Wilson who walked into the moment when every piece of that unraveling finally collided, leaving him unable to hold himself together. She hadn't meant to witness it. She wasn't supposed to be in that hallway, much less open that door. But fate has a way of placing the right eyes in front of the truths that have been hidden too long. And when she stepped inside, the man she saw was not the Keith Urban the world adored. He wasn't the polished star, the seasoned performer, the legend who never stumbled. He was someone else entirely. His breathing was uneven. His hands trembled. His eyes didn't focus on anything. It was as if he had momentarily forgotten where he was, what he was meant to do, or who he was supposed to be. This wasn't nerves. This was dissociation. The mind's desperate attempt to detach from a life that had become too heavy to inhabit. Lainey later said there was a blankness in him that chilled her, a kind of quiet terror that suggested his memories were slipping, his identity scattering beneath the pressure. He looked like a man trapped behind his own eyes. But the most devastating part was the silence. He wasn't talking, wasn't crying out, wasn't explaining what was happening. His collapse wasn't loud. It was the kind of collapse only someone standing inches away could feel. Then came the moment that changed everything. Keith looked up at her with tears clinging to his eyelashes and whispered something so fragile she felt it crack inside her. He didn't say he was scared of performing. He didn't say he felt unprepared. He didn't mention the show at all. He said the words of a man who had reached the edge of himself. "What am I doing here? I don't know how to do this anymore." It was then she realized he had not broken because of a song, a schedule, or a stage cue. He had broken under the weight of a life he no longer recognized. But the industry had no space for breakdowns. Not in a show running live. Not in a machine fueled by flawless illusions. Moments after Lainey heard those words, the hallway filled with voices speaking into radios, managers whispering instructions, wardrobe crew rushing with last-minute adjustments, and not one person asked if Keith was well. Not one person looked at him long enough to see the panic beneath his thinning composure. One executive snapped that if Keith didn't go on stage, the entire show would fall apart. The man in front of them wasn't a human being in crisis. He was an asset, a required component, a necessary piece of the performance puzzle. There was no room for fragility, the show must go on, no matter the cost. And then Lainey heard it. A phrase spoken in low, strained voices behind the dressing room wall. "We can't keep covering for him." 3 words that told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't the first time Keith had struggled. This wasn't the first sign that something inside him was collapsing. It was simply the first moment where hiding it became impossible. But there was one detail that haunted her most. Minutes before his collapse, Keith received a message. No one knows who sent it. No one knows what it said. But the instant he read it, something changed in his face. The light dimmed. His breath caught. His shoulders sagged. And then he whispered a phrase that sounded like heartbreak cracking open. "Not tonight." Within seconds, he fell apart. The truth was painfully clear. Keith Urban was not crying because he feared forgetting lyrics. He wasn't overwhelmed by a rehearsal mistake or a pressure-filled schedule. He was collapsing under the accumulated weight of everything he had carried alone for too long. The divorce that hollowed him, the exhaustion that ate through his resilience, the slow erosion of identity that fame had demanded, the commercial machine that squeezed him dry, the loneliness that shadowed him even in crowded rooms. In that moment, his tears weren't about the show. They were about his life slipping out of his hands. And when the spotlight finally hit him on stage, what the world saw was not steadiness. It was muscle memory. A mask so practiced it could survive even when the man wearing it was breaking inside. He looked calm only because he had spent a lifetime learning how to hide tremors. Later that night, long after the applause faded, he didn't celebrate. He didn't socialize. He wandered the empty backstage hallways alone, moving like a man searching for a version of himself he could not find. A janitor found him sitting on a crate in the loading bay, staring blankly at the floor. Only then did the full weight of his collapse become undeniable. And still, Nashville tried to bury it. Executives called for silence. Team members whispered warnings. The machine closed its doors around the truth, terrified that the world might finally see what they had hidden for months, maybe years. But Lainey couldn't shake the image of that dressing room. She couldn't unhear the whispers. She couldn't unfeel the heaviness of his voice. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a confession his soul could no longer hold. When the cameras shut off and the audience drifted into the night, Keith Urban didn't join the celebrations or the polished whirl of industry. Congratulations. Instead, he wandered through the empty backstage corridors like a child who had lost his way, moving without direction, without urgency, as if he no longer knew where he was supposed to stand in the world he had once commanded. The halls that had echoed with music now held only the soft tap of his footsteps and the quiet ache of a man trying to breathe through a storm no one else could feel. Someone later found him sitting alone beside his guitar, the instrument silent in his lap. The overhead light cast a faint glow across his face, revealing not the superstar millions recognized, but a man stripped of myth, weary, honest, and human in a way he had never allowed himself to be on stage. There was no mask left to wear, no persona left to hold, only truth. And perhaps that is the legacy he never meant to leave behind. Not the chart-topping hits, not the world tours, not the titles carved into the history of country music, but the reminder that even the strongest among us can fracture, that a lifetime spent pretending to be unbreakable does not protect a soul from breaking. What the world calls a breakdown was simply a man finally telling the truth.